Imagine a giant, a civilization that's, thousands of years old. It's produced some of the most profound philosophy, art, architecture in human history.
It really should be standing tall, radiating confidence.
Exactly. It should be the elder statesman on the world stage. But it isn't. At least not according to the author we're looking at today.
Yeah, quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah, instead, imagine this giant is constantly looking over its shoulder. It feels besieged. And instead of asserting itself, it's sort of trapped in this endless apology.
Trying to prove to everyone else that it isn't backward or chaotic.
Right, it's like a grandmaster of chess trying to explain to a checkers player why their moves aren't just random.
And that is the central, really uncomfortable tension we're unpacking in this deep dive. The source material is Defense of Hindu Society by Sitaram Goel.
And just a heads up for everyone listening, this is not a light read. Goel is a heavy hitter in modern Indian thought. And he's known for being, well, let's just say, uncompromising.
That's putting it mildly. His thesis cuts right to the bone. He argues that Hindu society is suffering from a crisis of confidence.
A self-forgetfulness, he calls it.
Yes, and that in a desperate bid to be accepted by the modern world, by Western standards, really Hindus have started to mimic the very ideologies that he believes want to dismantle them.
So the mission here is to really understand that diagnosis. We need to look at how he separates what he calls Sanatana Dharma, or universal spirituality,
from what he labels prophetic creeds. And he doesn't just see them as different religions. He sees them as ideologies of imperialism.
That's a crucial distinction. If you don't get that framework, his political points just won't make sense.
Right.
So let's get into his diagnosis, this idea, the psychology of surrender. What struck me was how specific he gets. He's not just saying Hindus are weak. He points to the actual language they use.
Exactly. He says the modern Hindu intellectual is constantly trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and the prime example he gives is the misuse of a very famous Vedic verse.
Ekam sadvipra bahudamadanti.
That's the one.
Truth is one. Wise men speak of it in diverse ways. I mean, I've seen that everywhere. It's the go-to line to show how tolerant Hinduism is.
It is. But Goel asks us to look at why it's being used. He says it's not a celebration of diversity anymore. It's a shield.
A shield.
Yeah. He argues modern spokespersons trot this out to say to Christians or Muslims, look, we're just like you. We believe in one God too. Please don't call us heathens.
So it's a defensive move. Please don't hurt us. We're basically in the same club.
Precisely. A plea for validation. He calls it an inferiority complex. He points out how scholars spend so much time trying to equate Brahma with Abraham or Manu with Noah.
Which sort of implies that Abraham and Noah are the gold standard.
Right, and that your own tradition is only valid if it lines up with theirs. It's a complete surrender of your own categories.
To explain how absurd this is, he uses this analogy that I found. Oh, it's pretty brilliant. The story of the Soviet diplomat.
Oh, this one is a classic. It perfectly captures the clash of worldviews.
So you've got this Soviet diplomat. He's visiting a free city in the West. He walks into a hotel and asks for the housing committee.
And the receptionist is just, completely confused.
Right. She's like, we don't have one of those. You just go find a place and rent it.
And the diplomat is baffled. He asks, okay, so where is the food committee?
There isn't one. You just go to a store and buy food. And he keeps going, right. Transport committee. No, just call a taxi. Finally, he just throws his hands up.
And says, this is very bad. It is absolute chaos.
I love that. He literally cannot process freedom. He thinks the absence of a central controller means anarchy.
And that reaction, it is chaos. That's exactly how Goel says a monotheist views Hinduism. They look at Sanatana Dharma and ask, where is your one book? Who is your one sage?
Yeah, it was the central command.
Exactly. Who's the Pope of Hinduism? And when the Hindu says, well, we don't have just one, find your own path, choose your own deity.
The monotheist just sees a mess, a system failure.
But the tragedy for Goel is that the Hindu starts to agree with the diplomat. They start saying, oh, no, you're right. This is a mess. Let's invent a housing committee for the soul so we look more organized.
Look, here's our one book. Here's our one God.
And Goel is just screaming from the page, don't apologize for your freedom. The fact that you don't have a central command is a feature, not a bug.
That's a huge reframing because organized religion is usually seen as superior. But he goes even further. He doesn't just say they're different. He actually attacks the spiritual validity of monotheism itself.
He does. He calls it disguised materialism.
That is a massive charge. How does he justify that?
It comes down to where you place God. He argues that in monotheism, God is extracosmic, outside the universe. He created the world, but he isn't in the world.
Like a potter is separate from the pot.
Exactly. So if God is out there in heaven, then the world itself is just dead matter. It's a resource to be used. It creates a huge gap between the creator and the creation.
Whereas in Sanatana Dharma, the whole point is that manavidi, know thyself.
And the ultimate goal is realizing, Aham Brahmosmi, I am that divinity. The potter is also the clay. God is in the world, in the human, in the river, in the tree.
So for Goel, the prophetic creeds are all about the outer, the specific prophet, the one book, the relics.
Which he argues isn't really spirituality. It's more like politics and sociology, group identity. Sanatana Dharma, on the other hand, is about the actual evolution of consciousness.
He even brings in the Buddha here, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, he points out that the Buddha taught sila, which is conduct, but also samadhi, meditation, and prajna, wisdom. Goel's point is that the monotheistic creeds stop at sila.
They stop at follow these rules.
Right, do as you're told. But that's just obedience, not spiritual evolution. The Dharma tradition says you have to move beyond just good conduct into direct experience. You have to see the truth for yourself.
So he's saying monotheism is sort of incomplete. It stopped halfway up the mountain.
That's his view. A system of ethics and social control, but without the deep science of consciousness that defines Dharma.
Which brings us to the part that often makes modern people, including many modern Hindus, pretty uncomfortable. The defense of polytheism and idolatry.
The dirty words of religious discourse.
For sure. We're conditioned to see polytheism as primitive. They didn't understand meteorology, so they invented a god for thunder. Goel just throws that whole idea out.
Completely. He reclaims it as a sign of spiritual richness. His argument is, if you truly see the divine, you see it everywhere. In the sky, the earth, the river Ganga, the cow.
Your own mother and father.
Exactly. If divinity is infinite, then its expressions must be infinite. So many gods is the only logical conclusion.
So for him, monotheism is actually the spiritually impoverished view.
He calls it a poverty of imagination, trying to bottle the entire ocean in a single cup.
Okay, but what about the idol, the physical statue? I think for a lot of people, that's the real hurdle. Bowing to a piece of stone, it just feels superstitious.
And Goel addresses this with a wonderful story about Sri Ramakrishna. A skeptic challenged him, pointed to the idol of Kali, and said, "That's just a slab of stone. It's superstition."
And Ramakrishna supposedly had conversations with that very statue.
He did, and he just looked at the skeptic, completely puzzled. Because he didn't see stone, he looked at the idol and saw pure, living consciousness, Satchidananda.
So the idol is a tool.
A focal point, a crystallization of the abstract into the concrete. Goel says if you only see stone, that's a limitation of your vision, not the idol's reality.
It's like looking at a Van Gogh and saying, that's just canvas and pigment. You're technically right, but you're missing the entire point.
Precisely. And he also brings in Rome Swarup's work here on the idea of the jealous god. This is key to his political argument later.
What's the distinction?
Swarup pointed out that in the Vedas, the gods are friends. Indra and Varuna are invoked together. They cooperate. There's no conflict between the one and the many.
Because they're all aspects of one reality.
But the prophetic creeds introduce the jealous god. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And that, Swarup argues, introduces politics into spirituality. It becomes a battle. My God versus your God.
The conflict is theological, not mystical.
Exactly. It's the theological mind that creates war, not the mystic consciousness.
And this is the perfect bridge to the most controversial part of the book, his critique of modern Indian politics.
His critique of secularism.
Right. And to be clear, he's not against the idea of a secular state in principle. He's critiquing the specific brand of it practiced in post-independence India, what's often called Nehruvian secularism.
He sees it as a smokescreen. He argues that in the Indian context, secularism became a code word for protecting what he calls Islamic imperialism and suppressing Hindu identity.
Which, on the surface, can sound like a conspiracy theory. But he offers an anecdote from his own life that really illustrates his point.
The seminar with Jayaprakash Narayan and Hamid Dalwai.
Yes. So Hamid Dalwai was a Muslim social reformer, a very courageous man. He came to this seminar to talk about the need for reform within his own community.
To talk about Muslim communalism, to use the term, he wanted to expose the grip of the orthodox clerics.
Which you'd think a secular progressive gathering would champion, right? A reformer speaking truth to power within his own group.
You would think. But when Dalwai started speaking, the other Muslim leaders in the room shouted him down. They wouldn't let him speak.
But that's not the part that bothered Goel the most.
No. The kicker for him was that the Hindu secularists in the room, the progressives, the leftists, they just sat there in silence.
They didn't defend the reformer.
Not at all. And Goel saw that as total cowardice. He believed the secular establishment was so terrified of offending the minority vote bank that they'd abandon a genuine reformer to the wolves.
So in his view, the secularists were actually enabling the fundamentalists they claimed to oppose.
Exactly. By silencing moderate voices like Dalwai's and shaming any Hindu who spoke up for their own heritage as a communalist.
And this all ties back to that slogan we mentioned at the start, Sarva Dharma Samabhava.
Equal respect for all religions.
It sounds so beautiful. Who could possibly argue with that? But Goel says it's basically a suicide pact.
He calls it a one-way street. He asks, how can you have equal respect when one side's core doctrine is that your entire way of life is a sin destined for hell?
If one side says all paths are valid and the other side says, no, only my path is valid and you're an infidel, then equal respect just means the tolerant side gets steamrolled.
It's the classic paradox of tolerance. If a society is infinitely tolerant, its ability to be tolerant is eventually seized and destroyed by the intolerant.
So his diagnosis is, well, it's pretty grim. What's the prescription? What does he want people to do?
His solution is, first and foremost, intellectual and spiritual, a reawakening. And step one is to just stop looking at yourself through their eyes.
Stop trying to prove you're monotheistic. Stop apologizing for idols.
Yes, be proud of the freedom that looks like chaos to an unfree mind.
And what's step two?
Turn the gaze around. Instead of judging Hinduism by the standards of the Bible or the Quran, judge them by the standards of Sanatana Dharma. Ask, does this doctrine expand consciousness? Or does it just demand blind obedience?
So evaluate them as political ideologies, not just as spiritual paths.
Correct. But his vision is bigger than just India. He sees this as a global project. He calls for a revival of the world's ancient indigenous spiritual traditions.
The pre-Christian traditions of Europe, the Americas, Africa.
All of them. He believes Sanatana Dharma is just the most well-preserved version of mankind's natural spirituality. He wants to help other cultures recover their lost gods.
It's a fascinating idea that the one God model is what divides humanity by creating the believer and the kafir, while the many-gods model is what can unite it.
Because it recognizes divinity in everything. It doesn't need to convert you. It just needs you to wake up to the divinity that's already there.
So to bring this all together, Goel's defense of Hindu society isn't just a political track. It's the defense of a whole way of seeing the universe.
That's the core of it. For him, it's about preserving a worldview of spiritual freedom, where you don't need a central committee to tell you what God is. If you lose that, you don't just lose a nation, you lose the last major civilization that champions the science of consciousness over the ideology of obedience.
It leaves us with a really provocative question to think about. In a world that prizes tolerance so highly, Goel is asking, at what point does tolerance become a form of surrender? If you tolerate ideologies that are inherently intolerant of your existence, are you being virtuous?
Or are you just being suicidal? It's a question that feels more relevant now than ever, and Goel demands that we answer it before it's too late.
A heavy, but definitely a necessary exploration. Thanks for helping us walk through this.
Always a pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.